So, the art of making up your mind is the art of forming justified true beliefs. The art of participating in conversation is the art of asking good questions, having a sense of humor, shared sense of humor, and knowing how and how not to offend, right? These are quite good skills to have. Now, I think we can both agree that in all these cases, the best way to develop these skills is to practice. So practice making up your mind as often as you can, and practice having conversations with each other. We now get to the core of this evening's lecture, which is how does knowledge relate to writing? And so this I will say a number of times in different ways. It should be easy to get it all down at one point. You don't have to get it all down the first time I say it. And like I say, it's available in writing in various places. Add the following literary definition to knowledge, to your definition of knowledge. Don't be satisfied with being able to make up your mind. Don't be satisfied with being able to talk, right? We know these people, right? Full of opinions, right? Very good at talking about them, right? They may be knowledgeable, but we need to give them this one last competence before we really want to trust them academically, right? And here it is. You know something if you are able to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it, right? And so you may ask, but Thomas, what is a prose paragraph? It is at least 6 sentences long, at most 200 words. It says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it. Right? Think of that as the unit of production. This is the object you want to be able to make. If you're a good writer, right, you're somebody who can compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing you know and supports, elaborates, or defends it. You might say it expresses a belief you have that hopefully is true and offers a justification for it. Right? This is the thing you want to be able to make. Does that make sense? The way you decide whether or not it should support, elaborate, or defend is you think about these other knowledgeable people that you're supposed to be virtually conversing with in your writing, right? So you think to yourself, if this is what I want to say, if this is the one thing I want to say, we articulate that usually in what we call the key sentence of the paragraph. One of the sentences in the paragraph should say this one thing pretty declaratively, pretty simply, right? In a nice, simple declarative sentence. We look at that sentence and then we say, what difficulty does the reader have with this idea? Right? So I'm going to make this claim, I'm going to say this thing, I'm going to assert this, right? What difficulty does that pose for the reader? And then you think of your fellow students, you think, well, this particular claim would make them, they would find it hard to believe, maybe, right? And if they find it hard to believe, then you have to support it. Right? You have to provide evidence. So you're going to say, you're going to look at that and you're going to say, this is hard to believe, so I'm going to provide some evidence. I'm going to support this in the paragraph. But they might also find it hard to understand. Right? Not necessarily because they've never heard these words before, but you could say, okay, I'm going to define these terms. The other one is that they might say, well, I've seen these words before, but I also know that you have to tell me how you're applying them. You have to be more precise. You have to give these words a precise meaning once you've taken them into your paragraph, right? So I need you to be more precise, right? So I need you to help me understand exactly what you mean. And lastly, and this is again goes back to this idea of being provoked, the reader just might find it difficult to agree with you. So in that case, the reader has presumably already made up their mind, right? And you're going to say something that they're not going to agree with. So you have to spend the paragraph defending this point against the objections that you imagine the reader has, right? So either the reader finds it hard to understand, or the reader finds it hard to believe, or the reader finds it hard to understand, or the reader finds it hard to agree with. And this sets up the task for you. Does that make sense? Remember, at least 6 sentences, at most 200 words. Right? Says one thing, supports, elaborates, or defends. Now, I have this fantastic privilege of working at a university. I've pretty much worked at a university all my life. I've always worked with academics. I've always worked with smart, knowledgeable people, people who know stuff. They're very interesting people. I learned everything about the Trans-Iranian Railway once, just by working with one of the authors here at the university. I was very privileged to be able to do that. Now, You also all know things. You know lots of things. If you didn't know a lot of things, you wouldn't be here in this room, because part of the requirement for attending university is to already have an education going in, which means you know a bunch of stuff, right? You're knowledgeable people. And that's important for me to point out, because I could ask you to write down 3 declarative sentences, each of which expresses one thing you know, right? And I think you know where I'm going with this, right? If we assume you know them, then we assume that these 3 sentences express true justified beliefs, right? And I'm assuming you would be able to converse with each other about these sentences. You would be able to have interesting, intelligent conversations with good questions, a nice sense of humor, there'd be some laughter, and maybe a little bit of occasional offense and provocation that you could use to move the conversation forward, right? I'm assuming this about you, right? So I guess I'm also kind of assuming that you could write a coherent prose paragraph, right? That you know enough to put into a coherent prose paragraph. So suppose you all wrote 3 sentences like that down, and then in a couple of weeks you come and visit me in the office and you show me your 3 paragraphs that you've written. Right? So today you write down 3 sentences, 2 weeks later you come to me and you show me the 3 paragraphs. And I look at them and they're coherent, right? And there's 6 sentences, most 200 words, at least 6 sentences and most 200 words. And they support, elaborate, or defend these 3 things. Right? Does that prove that sitting here in this room at this moment, you knew those 3 things 2 weeks earlier? Shaking your head, that's very good. It's a rhetorical question. You know the answer is no. The only thing it proves is that if I give you 2 weeks, you could learn, you could acquire the knowledge that these 3 sentences state, right? And I pretty much only have to know that you're students at CBS to write down 3 sentences that I can pretty confidently say, if you don't already know them, then if I give you 2 weeks and a pretty good reason to do so, you could learn it, right? You wouldn't be in this room if you didn't have that capacity, right? So really it only proves that you can learn those things given 2 weeks. That's all it proves. We write down 3 sentences, and you show me something in 2 weeks, all it proves is you are able to learn, which is great, right? But it doesn't prove that you have knowledge. So the only way to make it an interesting test of whether or not you know anything right now at this moment, and I'm not going to put you through this test, but right, the only way to make it an interesting test is to put an interesting time limit on it. And so the question is, what is an interesting time limit to put on the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing you know? Right? What is an interesting time limit? And this is really the core. If you remember only this thing, then you are, wow, then you weren't listening to everything else. But if you remember this thing, you'll be happy. Here it is. To know something is the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph of at least 6 sentences and at most 200 words that says one thing and supports, elaborates, or defends it in 27 minutes. 27 minutes. Give yourself 27 minutes. If you can do it in 27 minutes, then allow yourself that you know it, right? You've been able to make up your mind about it. You've been able to converse intelligently about it, and you've been able to compose a paragraph about it in 27 minutes. Now, what I'm going to tell you is that if for everything you know from now on at university, right, you also develop the ability to compose a coherent prose paragraph about it in 27 minutes, you will not regret having that skill, right? You will not regret having made that effort. In a pinch, when you really need to, you can get it down to 18 minutes, right? And you might say to yourself, what are these numbers, 27 and 18, where do they come from? Well, it's easy, right? 27 minutes plus a 3-minute break is 2 paragraphs an hour, right? That is nice to know. It is nice to know that for anything I know, for any subject I might be dealing with and have acquired knowledge about, I can also compose a coherent prose paragraph at a rate of 2 paragraphs an hour, right? It's very nice to know. And if I'm in really good shape, really practicing, really doing well, I've got it down to 18 minutes plus a 2-minute break. I can do 3 paragraphs an hour. That's also nice to know at a different time, right? These are all things that you want to have confidence about, right? Now, it's obvious why this would apply to schoolwork, but I can assure you that your employers, even when you leave school, will value the fact that not only can you write, but that given any writing assignment, you have a good sense of how long it's going to take you and how confidently you will go into that process, right? That writing is not a threat. Writing is not anxiety to you. Writing is a practical task, and you are in control of your abilities to do it, right? You understand how strong you are, right? The only way to develop that strength and that sense of your own strength is through practice, right? You're going to have to train this ability, and that is what I want to help you do. That's why I'm here, right? That's not just why I'm here tonight. But that's why I'm here. So when you're writing as you go forward, if you run into trouble, then you can come to me and you can get support in that ability, right? But you have to start with that idea that the unit of production, right, the thing you're trying to make, the object you're trying to become a good craftsman of, right, is the paragraph.